Yes, this is indeed my next project, and if you're at all familiar with this game, you'll know that I've actually been teasing this for quite some time. I planned to cover this game for a while, and while I'm a little late starting it, I actually planned to have this started sometime around September. I didn't expect Lost Dimension and Awakening to take so long, basically. But I will say that I have recorded a pretty large chunk of the early part of the game, and so you can expect regular uploads for a little while. And here's just a small bit that's only going to be relevant to people who are watching this as it's uploaded. I may be out of the country for a while in January, so I'm going to try and blitz through recordings as much as I can in December so that I can still have a steady stream of uploads going through January. After the very beginning, getting through this game's daily events doesn't actually take very long, so I'm hoping that I'll get a decent chunk of this game recorded before Fates is out. Of course, I'm definitely not going to get the whole thing done before then, which is why this playthrough will most likely be split into two halves. There is actually another reason that it'll be split into two halves, but that comes later. Before we get started though, I just want to explain two things about this game that I'm about to be covering. The first might not make as much sense to you if you are unfamiliar with what this game is. The second will be more aimed at those who don't know what this game is and haven't seen it before. Also, this game is going to be in a very different style to Lost Dimension was. I intend for this to be a more planned, thought-out, researched, walkthrough style playthrough, comparable to Fire Emblem Awakening. So I have been researching this game for quite a while, and I have also created stat sheets just like Awakening. Obviously not for every persona in the game, but for all of the ultimate ones for each arcana, and a select few other ones. And on that note, that brings me to the first major point to discuss. So, first topic of discussion. This is going to be a max social link run. If you don't know what social links are, think support conversations in Fire Emblem, except that each one has 10 levels rather than 3. There are 22 social links in this game, each one representing a major tarot arcana. This includes one new arcana, which corresponds to a new social link that was added in the FES re-release. Leveling up these social links works kinda like a social simulator. Every day you can choose to spend time with one of your friends, each of them are only available on very specific days, and you talk to them, choose the right responses in conversations, and you'll get your social link ranked up. Through these rank-up conversations, you see some interesting development, not just for party members, but also for NPCs too. It's one of the biggest draws of the Persona series to me, just seeing how so many different characters grow and change, and for that reason, whenever I play a Persona game, I like to see every single social link conversation possible, and that's why I'm doing this on a max social link run. Now, why do I feel the need to explain, or rather, warn you that this is a max social link run? Well, here's the thing. You have a very strictly limited number of days in the schedule. Each person's only available on certain days. You also need to consider certain other factors, such as your main character's social stats, which need to be at certain points to even start particular links. Some of these links also require side quests to be done several months ahead of time before you actually start the link itself. Yeah, maxing all the social links is pretty complicated. In fact, FES made it easier, and it's still really complicated. To give a testament as to how ridiculous maxing all social links was in the vanilla version of Persona 3, the developers weren't even aware it was possible until some fans pointed it out. Yeah, that's how bad the scheduling is. What does this mean? Well, it means that if you want to max out all social links without a New Game Plus, you pretty much need to be following a walkthrough very specifically, never deviating from it, always doing exactly what the guide tells you to every day. Fortunately, there is a fantastic max social links walkthrough available for this game, one on Game FAQs by a user named Penguin Knight. I'll put a link to that in the description. And trust me, if you're going for max social links, you will want to read this guide. Now, this is another reason why this playthrough has been a little while in the making. I wanted to make sure that the author of this guide was okay with me following it in this video series. I made sure to tell him that I'd credit him at every point when I reference the guide, like I'm doing now. I am in no way intending to claim that I invented this guide to maxing social links. I obviously didn't. In fact, my very first playthrough, I followed this guide rigorously. And I really owe a lot to this guy, so I'm very pleased to announce that right when my Lost Dimension playthrough concluded, he got back to me saying that it was perfectly fine for me to follow his guide in my videos. So that's what I'll be doing. I wouldn't have gone ahead with this playthrough if he hadn't given me the go-ahead, so I'm thankful to him from that. Here's the main reason why I wanted to warn you about this though. Doing a max social link run is not for everyone. It heavily restricts what you do outside of dungeon crawling, and in fact, even within dungeon crawling and battles, you are restricted as to what personas you can use in battle, because what you can use is directly related to which social links you're working on at the time. Money is also extremely tight early in the game, as I'll be explaining when we get to it. We need to be gathering huge amounts of cash and spending it not on upgraded equipment or armor, but mostly on karaoke and game arcades. It makes sense in context, trust me. The main thing that makes the Max Social Link Guide so restrictive, at least early on, is the protagonist's 3 social stats: academics, charm, and courage. These all need to be at very specific levels by very specific deadlines. And in particular, making sure that courage is maxed out as early as possible requires you to follow a really strict schedule for the first few months of the game, never ever deviating from it. Because you have just barely enough time to max out your courage before you need it to be maxed. For those who just want to experience this game for the first time and want freedom to do whatever they want, you might find a max social links run very restrictive. In fact, it's extremely restrictive. Me personally, I have no problem with this. I actually played the game this way on my first playthrough, like I said. I don't really mind not having much choice in what I do every day in the game, but I know some people will, so just saying that a max social links run is not for everyone. There are certain social links that are more important than others because of the personas they give, and I'm going to be pointing those out during the run. And if you are planning on going for a max social link run, here's the best advice I can give you. Taking a page from the days of old adventure games. Save early, save often, don't overwrite saves. Trust me, you'll want to keep as many save files as you possibly can. And you'll want to keep some save files for even a few months earlier, because if you screw something up, it can take quite a while to recover, and in some cases you may not even be able to recover. It might be more efficient to just reload to an earlier save. Yeah, this can actually get pretty difficult. Like I said, a max social link run is not for everyone. For those worried about following the Max Social Link walkthrough, thinking that it might contain any spoilers, don't worry. Penguin Knight's FAQ does not contain any story spoilers at all, except for one, and that one is very clearly marked, and you will only see it if you're specifically looking for it. So apart from that, you can feel free to read this guide. It doesn't spoil anything about plot developments. It will admittedly spoil how long the game goes on for, as in how many days of interactivity there are. But let's just say the one point that the game seems to pretend that it's over, but it really isn't, it's extremely obvious you're not done, so it's not much of a spoiler. For one, there are at least 2 social links you haven't even started yet, which is a dead giveaway. Speaking of story spoilers, this game has a lot of pretty major twists at certain points, and I will be policing the comments section pretty heavily, deleting any spoilery comments. I'm sorry, but I really want people who have not experienced this story before to not be spoiled on certain things that happen. Those of you who played this game will know some obvious moments that you'll probably be tempted to yell out in advance, but just don't. Please have a little respect for people who haven't seen this story before. A few other notes about the social link system in this game, though. One of them is a kind of heartbreaking consequence of a max social links run. All social links with female characters of the same age as the protagonist are romantic by default. Which means that if you want to do a max social link run, you have to be a total jerk and cheat on all the girls at once. And if you follow the guide the right way, you'll never get caught for this. It's part of this reason that I've chosen Gary Stu to be the protagonist of this. And this might come as a surprise to some people, and I really... Okay, please don't get offended by this, but in my headcanon, I've always seen the Persona 3 protagonist as a bit of a jerk who seduces all the women in the game and doesn't give a damn about their feelings. Though there is room for him to develop out of this mentality later on. So yeah, we're going to be breaking everyone's hearts, and there's absolutely no way around it if you want 100% of this game. Persona 4 gave you the option to choose whether to be platonic or romantic with the girls, and I really wish there was an option in this game, but sadly there isn't. At least not for the male protagonist. And that's another important point. There was a PSP remake of this game called Persona 3 Portable, which gave you the option of playing as a female protagonist instead of a male one. And I'm pointing this out because the Max Social Links guide for Persona 3 FES will definitely not work for the female protagonist in Portable, because a large number of her social links are completely different to the male protagonists. In some ways, a lot of people actually like the female protagonist's social links better because unlike the male, she has social links with every playable party member. The male only has them with girls. Thankfully though, the same author does have a similar Max Social Links guide for the female protagonist route of the PSP version, so if you're playing that version, you will want to look at that instead. In fact, even the male protagonist's route's quite different than the PSP version, so you'll need a different guide for that too. Just be warned that, yeah, Persona 3 Portable is a very different game to FES, so I wouldn't exactly recommend using these videos as a guide for that version. With that out of the way, on to the second major thing that I wanted to discuss about this game, and this one pertains mainly to people who don't know about this game, and this also pertains mostly to viewers in America, who I'm pretty sure make up the vast majority of people on YouTube. This thing that I'm showing here is the Japanese box art of this game. If you look in the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see a ESRB rating, which puts it online with Fire Emblem Awakening, another game that I played on this channel, which was also ESRB in Japan. However, there's a lot of cultural dissonance when it comes to ratings for this game, and in the US in particular, this game carries an ESRB M17+ rating, and it's quite infamous for this fact. Actually, the entire Persona series gets M ratings in America, and normally, I would not do any M-rated content on my channel. I prefer this channel to go as high as T, mainly because, personally, I don't really even like playing particularly gory games or ones that have a lot of swearing. It's just not really my style. I don't enjoy those games very much. And part of why I don't swear in my videos is because I want this channel to be, well, not exactly family-friendly, but at least not excessively high in terms of what its content rating would be. But now I'm covering a game that has an ESRB M rating. Why am I doing this? Well, it's because it does not have anywhere near that higher rating in Australia, where I live. In Australia, this game and pretty much all the Persona games are rated M. How is that different, you say? Well, our M is the equivalent of the ESRB's T rating. Here, M means recommended for people 15 years and older, but it's not a restricted category, so technically speaking, anyone can buy it. It's just an advisory. Over here, the Persona series always gets these ratings, the equivalent of the America's T, and this is the rating that this game carries. Just M, the equivalent of T, for only fantasy violence, and that's all. Now, there's always been a lot of speculation as to why the Persona games carry M ratings in the US. In particular, the chibi art style spin-off Persona Q also carries an M rating in America, which I personally think is completely ridiculous. Yes, it still has its fair share of dark themes, but it's a heck of a lot less violent than any of the other games in the series, and even those aren't particularly violent. One very, very common answer to this game's rating in the US is that the Persona series gets an M rating because it features a recurring summon that, well, looks like a giant phallic part of the male anatomy. This has actually been confirmed to be 100% false. In fact, vanilla Persona 3 did not have this particular summon, and it still got an M rating, so obviously Mara is not the culprit, as much as memes would have you believe. In fact, the fighting game spin-offs in the series, which contain a good deal of swearing and people hitting each other with swords, guns, and knives, only get T ratings. This leads me to believe that Persona designs are responsible, but just not Mara in particular. It's more things like this. Now, yes, some of the summons in this game appear semi-nude, but for the most part, these are all creatures from mythology, and usually their designs are true to their depictions in the original mythological context, which in many cases are not intended to be sexual at all. However, there's some pretty big cultural dissonance in rating systems when it comes to dealing with partial nudity. Here in Australia, partial nudity is okay for the equivalent of a T rating, as long as it's not explicitly in a sex scene. Basically, in Australia, actual sexual content has to be pretty much actual on-screen sex to really count. If it's just static images, then it falls under sexualized imagery, which can only get you an M, or in America the equivalent of T, at best rating. In America, though, partial nudity is grounds for an instant M rating, regardless of if it's in a sexual context or not, even if it's just a static image like this. See, here's the thing, the personas in this game never actually do anything remotely sexual. They just appear for a few moments in battle, use an attack, and then disappear. Even an attack called Sexy Dance is never actually really animated, it just makes, like, hearts fly everywhere, so there's nothing particularly explicit about this. Now, there also are a few implied sexual situations in some of the female characters' social links. However, nothing is shown, the screen is just completely black, it's left completely up to your imagination what's actually happening, and the wording is vague enough that it could be interpreted as not sexual if you want to interpret it that way. So personally, I don't really feel that's grounds for a higher rating at all. But what I've gathered is the American rating system is pretty harsh on anything even vaguely sexual, while having next to no taboos against violence. Honestly, the violence in this game is very, very minor. There are a few cutscenes that contain blood, but actual combat, like in the RPG style, has absolutely no gore at all, and it's basically just the same as any other RPG, really. Well, with one exception that I'll be getting to. So, in my opinion, the M rating mostly comes from just how the ESRB is very paranoid about images that could even be vaguely sexual. A good example of this is the infamous Summer Scramble swimsuit censorship in Fire Emblem Awakening. Many people know that in the American version of this game, this scene was censored by putting a curtain over it, because it's entirely possible that just a partial nudity image like this on its own would be enough to bump the game's rating up to M. In Europe and Australia, though, this scene was completely uncensored, because Europe and Australia's rating systems don't consider fan service images to be grounds for a higher rating, as long as there's no explicit sex scenes involved. Building on this, in America, the only way for a game to get an adults-only rating is for it to be pornographic. Over in Australia and Europe, games can get adults-only ratings for violence as well. This in particular is why I feel the M rating on the Persona series in America is kind of weird, because it implies the series is just as extreme as something like Grand Theft Auto, which it really, really isn't, trust me. In fact, even in America, it is marketed as a dark, edgy, adults-only series, which seems kind of weird, because in Japan it's marketed for teenagers. They're the same age as the protagonists, and the themes the games deal with are meant to be the kind of things that are good lessons to teach teenagers. There are actually some who think that even the philosophical and psychological themes these games carry were enough for an M rating in America as well. Now, for the mainstream Shin Megami Tensei games, I can kinda see this, particularly because those games tend to be very, almost violently anti-religious, which might be a bit controversial in America. The Persona series isn't really like that though, or at least is nowhere near as extreme. Now, the PSP version of this game, Persona 3 Portable, in Australia actually did get our equivalent of America's M rating, though here it carries the same age bracket as our equivalent of T. The difference is that unless you have an adult accompanying you, you need to show proof that you're over 15 in order to buy these games. Persona 3 Portable got rated MA 15+ for strong themes and violence, though I'm wondering whether the fact that the female protagonist has a 10-year-old as a romance option might contribute to that somewhat. That's probably the case, seeing as Persona 3, the original, and FES did not get the strong themes warning. There is one thing in this game, though, that I think actually maybe might be grounds for that M rating, though, in America, and that pertains to the method of summoning personas in this game. So, if you have no knowledge of this game, I do feel that I need to warn you about this. This game does contain some imagery that people might find a bit disturbing. If you want just a brief idea of what it is, this. A big part of this game is that the summoning devices that you use for most of your combat abilities are shaped like guns and work by pointing them at your head and firing. This may have also contributed to the game's M rating in America, and this is the only Persona game that actually features this summoning system. The reasons why this is the case were only really gone into in detail in developer interviews, and I'll be explaining that when we actually get to that in the game itself, because the game doesn't really do a good job of fully explaining why this has to be done, but there is a reason for it. In fact, part of the reason for it is that the very act of doing this is quite traumatic and disturbing. But anyway, if images like this make you feel uncomfortable, be warned that you'll be seeing them a lot over the course of the game. There's no getting away from it because it's the very core of this game's battle system. Every few turns in battle, your characters will be doing this on a very regular basis. So, yeah, for those of you who are uncomfortable with this, you probably would have to not watch battle scenes at all. That is part of why I felt the need to give this warning in this video, because I know there are quite a few younger viewers on this channel, and yeah, this game's probably more suitable for people over 15, so that's just a warning. The reason why I mean, not so much fine with it, but I can let it slide, is that this game's actual stance on suicide and self-harm is, well, extremely negative. Getting into specifics would reveal some pretty major story spoilers, but let's just say this game is very, very, very anti-self-harm, and it really hammers in just how bad it is. So, yeah, just remember that. With all that explanation out of the way, the journey is ready to begin. Keep an eye on your clocks tonight, people, because weird things happen after midnight.